Spot news, A1 or B1 on newspapers, the only stories that were going to be covered, as opposed to having good feature stories like we used to do with the old WKR TV.
Akron was not only one of the largest in Ohio, it was one of the largest cities in the nation without commercial television news. With the purchase by Paxson, it was also not under any legal obligation to provide the people of Akron with any local programming. And the Akron TV station may have become the victim of federal government decisions made decades before.
And that lack of local programming means that so many things which make a city a community don't get attention. Fall throughout the Akron area means football season, high school football. It's the hard hits and camaraderie that bring communities around Akron together. But the high school football in this area isn't featured very much on television. Since Cleveland is where the news stations are located, many of them don't dedicate a lot of reporters and videographers to cover many Akron area high school sports. And beyond community events, there is serious news that needs intense coverage, but doesn't necessarily get it. For example, severe weather. It takes a Cleveland station an hour to get down to hard-hit areas to cover it. The current Akron news operation did an entire program live after a tornado that hit in the Canton area in 2002. When Akron lost local news programming on its television station, it lost an opportunity for the people of the area to exchange information and ideas about their community. And Paxson Communications didn't have to provide local coverage of any kind because of something that happened on the federal government level in the 1980s.
When Ronald Reagan became president and appointed Mark Fowler as chairman of the FCC, Fowler promoted an idea of what he termed unregulation. He saw regulation as the problem that needed to be solved. He wanted broadcasters to be treated the same way as newspapers. He referred to this as the print model. So a lot of the rules that had required them to find out what were the important issues in their community and then show that they put on programming that dealt with those issues were eliminated.
Therefore, when Paxson bought Channel 23 in 1996, it had no obligation to serve the local public interest and could fire the news staff and end the newscast without facing any penalties. Another effect of deregulation that had an effect on Channel 23's fate?
There was something that was usually referred to as the anti-trafficking rule. It was the idea that you shouldn't be able to buy and sell television stations the way you might sell pork bellies. So the idea was that you had to own it for a certain amount of time before you could resell it. That would force you to be, at least to some extent, committed to the idea of using it as a broadcast outlet rather than just an investment opportunity. When that disappeared again under Mark Fowler in the early 1980s, stations started to be bought and sold with great speed.
And that allowed ValueVision to sell the station to Paxson in a relatively short period of time and make a lot of money. The net gain for ValueVision's sale of 2 TV stations was about $27 million. The effect of these rule changes and all the controversy that the station faced over its 40-some-year history left Akron without traditional commercial television news.
As people celebrate the traditions the area does have, the one television news operation in the area that is making a go of it in Akron is going over its daily rundown of news.
Today on the officer that was shot.
And is trying to document what's going on in a large city. This satellite television newsroom opened in 2001.
If this were its own television market, it would be the size of Jacksonville or Oklahoma City or Dayton. And all of those, cities have 3 and 4 TV stations where they have big newsrooms that are banging each other every day and competing and those kind of things.
And Dayton, another Ohio city, is in a similar situation to Akron, located roughly an hour from Cincinnati, like Akron is about an hour from Cleveland. This Akron newsroom is not a traditional commercial television newsroom. And this day, there aren't any reporters working because one had jury duty and one was on vacation. So the staff just consists of anchor Eric Mansfield and producers and photographers. WKYC Television in Cleveland decided to start operating the Akron-based newscast 5 years ago in an effort to attract more of the Akron audience. WKYC worked out a local marketing agreement with the old station in Akron to use its signal to broadcast nightly news.
This is Akron Canton News.
WKYC opened an Akron studio and produced newscasts known as PAX 23 News. Mansfield had been a longtime Akron bureau reporter for WKYC and had worked at the old Akron television station before making the move to work for a Cleveland station. But the effort quickly lost support from the Akron station owner, Paxson Communications. In June 2005, Paxson dropped the local newscast again.
PAX Network across the country broke all of its local contracts in March of 2005. They became the I Network. And they just broke their contract and no longer wanted our news product. They can make more money on infomercials. So we suddenly had a show and no stage.
But the newscast quickly found a stage on a Time Warner cable channel. The Akron newscast from WKYC moved to cable channel 23 and has been there ever since.
We sure hope it's going to survive. Every indication is that the community has come together and stepped up in a way that makes it much more stable. I'd like to see our bosses at Time Warner Cable come out and say they feel comfortable with it. They haven't done that yet, but everything we're seeing behind the scenes indicates that the commitment's coming together, the news is going to stay. Akron was without its own newscast for 5 years. We've had a newscast back now for 5 years. We don't want to lose it again.
Could the new Akron News be headed down the same path as the old WAKR? Mansfield hopes not, but recognizes news in Akron is a challenge.
I think if news were easy for this town, somebody would have done it long before now. It's not an easy concept. TV news is an expensive operation. If you say elephant on the radio, people can visualize an elephant. If you say that on TV, you need to physically drive to the zoo with a camera, take video of an elephant, bring it back, process it, put it on the air. So it's more time consuming and it's costly. But that's what people expect when they tune in for TV news.
And that cost often means traditions like the Barberton Labor Day Parade aren't being covered by a television news station.
I would love to see more news output. I know that more people would contact you about events too. So that would be one thing to keep our community going if we knew we had an outlet.
Local coverage, a lot of things happen around here that are controversial even, and Cleveland doesn't even cover them. They're not even covered. Cleveland covers Cleveland and along the lakes, and you can't blame them. Their sponsors are from there.
One big example of what's not covered in Akron is elections. In 2001, congressional districts in the state of Ohio were changed, and Akron and Youngstown were placed in the same congressional district, the 17th. Longtime Akron area Congressman Tom Sawyer would have been in the same district as longtime Youngstown Congressman Jim Traficant. However, Traficant got into trouble with the law, and Sawyer ended up facing Traficant running from a federal prison and a young state senator from the Youngstown area in the Democratic primary, Tim Ryan. Many thought Sawyer would be a shoo-in since Akron was a larger city and Sawyer was the incumbent, but that was not to be. Ryan won the primary. That could be due to the television news coverage Ryan was able to get in Youngstown. Youngstown, unlike Akron, has several television stations representing the Northeast Ohio city with a population of just over 82,000 people, according to the 2000 census. Even though it's smaller than Akron, the two cities have a similar history, losing its primary business. More than 20 years ago, Youngstown lost a lot of steel jobs, ruining the city's economy. And the merger of these two cities into the same congressional district tied the two cities together again. Because it coincided with the downfall of longtime folk hero and Congressman Jim Traficant, the Youngstown TV stations covered Ryan's run for the 17th district heavily. Ryan called his campaign a grassroots effort, and he tried to reach voters in every way possible. Appearances on television news programs were a big part of his campaign. Some people in Akron say they know very little about the man representing them in Congress.
I'm sorry. Do you know his name?
Can't think of it all.
If I said Tim Ryan, does that help you at all?
No.
No? Okay. All right.
No.
How long have you lived here?
About 49, 50 years.
Okay. Did you know Tom Sawyer though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I know he's a big labor supporter,
and I'm a union rep, so he supports the labor. I know that he fights for the jobs to keep them here in Ohio, which is it's really important to us to keep our jobs here.
Did you know anything about Tim Ryan?
None at all.
Okay. Do you know he's from Youngstown?
I believe I knew that, yeah.
Okay. What do you think that's a problem, that a lot of people in this area don't even know who's representing them right now?
Probably. I'm a little more politically active than most, and I didn't know it, so I would say it probably means he hasn't been doing much, or certainly not in the news that we would know.
Those interviews were conducted right outside Ryan's district office, located in Akron. Ryan says he's not surprised that some people in Akron aren't very knowledgeable about him.
In Youngstown, I'm on TV probably 2 or 3 times a week on one issue or another. And in Akron, you're not. In Cleveland, I'm not.
Ryan says when he first started to run for the congressional seat, he was surprised to learn that Akron didn't have a traditional commercial television station, let alone 3 commercial television stations to interview him and help him communicate with the people of Akron.
It's always been fascinating to me, because when we first started running and coming over here in Akron, we're like, well, how do we get on Akron TV? And they're like, well, there's this channel 23. And we're like, well, what's that? You know? And it took us a long while to even get on it. And so, yeah, it's very surprising. We've unfortunately learned the hard way early on, but I didn't realize that it's one of the bigger cities without it.
Cleveland television is supposed to serve the people of Akron and its surrounding communities, but Ryan says Cleveland TV stations don't ever interview him or cover big events in Akron.
We had $20 million, which ended up being $17.5 million, in the defense appropriations bill to go to Lockheed Martin in Akron, which is a big deal. It's for the new high-altitude spaceship. And there was one Cleveland camera there with no reporter, just kind of, going to tape something, and I don't even know what showed up. But that's the kind of thing. There's something very substantial going on in Akron, and yet it still didn't draw the Cleveland media down there.
The congressman says the situation with the media in his 2 primary cities is very different. In Youngstown, the 4 TV stations cover him constantly, where in Akron, getting in contact with those he represents about what he's doing in Washington is much more difficult.
It is harder to get your message out as to what you're doing to serve the constituents. You have to rely on mail, you have to rely on sometimes direct telephone calls, emails, those kinds of things. And that doesn't always get to everybody. They throw their mail away, but everybody kind of watches the news.
The fact that television news is hard to come by in Akron is something that's an inconvenience to some, but it's not something very many people worry about. You see, they don't understand that the events and political decisions are being covered by only the Akron Beacon-Journal. And while the paper does a good job at covering these things, in a world where video and technology rule, Akron and its suburbs are being left out in the cold, and some feel misrepresented by the Cleveland news media.
People that live in Brooklyn, suburban Cleveland, Lakewood, wherever, they probably think Akron's a horrible, those murders, because all they get is that.
Mark Williamson started in the radio reporting side of things in 1979 and eventually moved to television at WAKR and WAKC. He started as the station's main news anchor in 1980 and was named news director in 1986. He maintained both roles until Paxson fired everyone at the station in 1996.
I was coming back from a story, and I called in the newsroom to check in, and I got a voicemail recorder, which we never ever used there. And I just had a funny feeling, because the new owner had owned the place for all of about 10 hours.
It was an awful end to a long struggle for Mark Williamson, and even though he hated to see the WAKC newsroom fold, he said now he knows that the end of news in Akron was the station's only possible conclusion. But Williamson said even with all the trouble the station faced in garnering ratings, he was not prepared for what Paxson Communications did to the newsroom in 1996. He said the decision to fire the entire newsroom staff was a complete surprise, since Bud Paxson, the owner of Paxson Communications, had promised to spend more money, hire more staff, and make the news product competitive with Cleveland.
The night before, the 11 o'clock news was over. The new guy hadn't taken over yet, and I said to our producer out in the parking lot right before 12 o'clock, I said, gee, I wonder what it's going to be like when Bud Paxson takes over. And at that moment, and I kid you not, it was about 60 degrees outside. Or no, it was about 50 degrees outside. And as soon as I said that,
this, you know how front moves in, you can feel it? This just cold, this cold wind blew across the parking lot. We both kind of went, huh. I tried calling you today.
Williamson